Hello and welcome. I'm Daniel, Chef Arirang News. Let's start with the headlines. The MERS death toll rises to 20, but there's a glimmer of hope in the fact that 440 people were released from quarantine overnight. President Park Geun-hye continues to monitor Korea's response to the outbreak, urging officials and experts to better manage the situation. And Korea's main rival parties agreed to vote on the prime minister nominee. It's a positive development in the ongoing efforts to combat MERS, as the new prime minister will be in charge of those operations. Korea's top diplomat met with U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Tony Blinken to discuss ways to pressure Pyongyang to denuclearize. Washington has also vowed to have strong response to any North Korean provocations. Let's begin with the latest on the MERS syndrome here in Korea, MERS situation here in Korea. That is, it's almost been a month now since the outbreak began. The number of cases is still rising, but so is the number of people who have recovered. Let's go now over to our Kwon Soa standing by at the news center. Soa, can you give us the latest?
Daniel, we had 8 new cases and 1 more death today. The person who passed away was a 54-year-old woman who died this morning. Health authorities said she had pre-existing ailments, including respiratory problems and high blood pressure. She was in the same hospital last month from the 19th to 20th as the first MERS patient. This has put the total number of deaths at 20, and the total number of cases stands at 162. Now, more than 6,500 people are under quarantine, while more than 3,900 others have been cleared of infection. Now, a good piece of news is that 2 more people have been released from the hospital, bringing the number of people who have recovered up to 19. And of the 124 patients who are undergoing treatment for the disease at hospitals, 17 are currently not in stable conditions.
Now, with tertiary infections and even quaternary infections being a concern, there are concerns this critical situation won't change anytime soon, Soa.
That's right, Daniel, especially as there are concerns that the standard incubation period of 14 days seems to be longer in some cases. In fact, patient 14, or the so-called super spreader, is said to have infected more people after the 2-week period. But the health authorities said their goal is to reduce the number of patients by the end of the month. Also, at Samsung Medical Center, which is now the origin of 80 cases and where 5 of the latest 8 cases originated, will enforce its surveillance policy. Every patient who was at the hospital from June 2nd to 10th will be monitored closely. Meanwhile, the World Health Organization held a 9th emergency meeting on the outbreak, and it reconfirmed that the virus is not a threat to the general population and said it does not meet the criteria of public health emergency of international concern, but it said that more cases will appear for the time being.
Okay, so what's the latest on the elementary school child who was thought to have contracted the virus?
Well, that's still not being confirmed, as the 7-year-old who may have contracted the virus from their father has had to undergo 5 tests. Now, in the first test, the child tested negative for the virus, but tested positive in the second. The 3rd test was negative again, and the 4th and 5th tests were inconclusive. So earlier it was said the child would have to undergo a 6th test, but authorities said they will simply keep an eye on the situation for now, as the child has not shown any symptoms of MERS. Now, that's all I have for now, but I'll bring you more updates in our later newscast. Back to you, Daniel.
Well, thank you for that report, Soa. Moving on, President Park Geun-hye has repeatedly stressed the need to be transparent in informing the public about developments in the MERS outbreak. Meeting with officials, experts, and the head of the most affected Samsung Medical Center at a state-run research lab in central Korea, the president said not sharing all the information spurs greater public anxiety and could hamper the government response. She also asked officials and experts to keep tabs on anyone that comes into contact with MERS patients so that facilities like the Samsung Hospital don't become a breeding ground for the virus and the outbreak can be completely stopped. President Park then urged authorities to be more cautious in studying the size of the viral spread, taking into account how families in Korea often take care of patients. As the MERS outbreak becomes protracted with more and more people in home quarantine, it is getting difficult for health authorities to keep track of them, and not everyone is staying put. This while most people are choosing to stay home in an effort to avoid infection. For more, we turn to our Shin Se-min.
The extended MERS outbreak is keeping people at home, But not everyone is staying there. Just yesterday, a man who was advised to quarantine himself at home after he started showing symptoms of infection left his home and boarded a fishing boat in Incheon for a local tour. After authorities located the 32-year-old, known only by his surname Kim, they called the boat back to port and transferred Kim to a local health center for monitoring. The 15 other people on the boat have not yet shown any symptoms of infection and have not been quarantined. Health authorities have instructed people in home quarantine to stay at home for 2 full weeks and minimize contact with other individuals. But it's getting more difficult for them to keep track of everyone and ensure that they aren't breaking quarantine. Already 4 other people under home quarantine have left their residences. Under the current law, people who break home quarantine will be fined 3 million won or over $2,600. Some people, however, would prefer to stay put. Just this past Sunday, the number of people using public transportation dropped nearly 22% from 2 weeks ago when concerns about MERS began to develop. It's expected that the drop in usage will push down the transportation authorities' income by more than $1.2 million. Worried members of the public aren't going near hospitals either, even if they need drugs. Rather, a jump in sales of non-prescription drugs at convenience stores show that more people have been purchasing basic medicines there. With the MERS virus still spreading, it is unclear when the concerns will subside and the public will feel confident about going through their daily routines. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
And with the MERS outbreak continuing to take a toll on the Korean economy, the Korea Institute of Finance has slashed the country's economic growth outlook for this year to 2.8%. That's a nearly 1 percentage point drop from its previous forecast of 3.7%. The institute cited sluggish domestic demand and slowing exports, as well as the effects of MERS for the downgrade. This marked the first time a major domestic institution has put the country's growth rate in the 2% range. Korea will roll out a set of economic measures to reduce the fallout of the MERS outbreak and the current drought later this month. In an economic ministers' meeting on Wednesday, Finance Minister Choi Kyung-hwan said the current MERS outbreak is prompting a drop in the sales of major retailers while foreigners are canceling trips to the country. Choi added that the government will mobilize all possible manpower and equipment to minimize the damage from the drought. Although the minister did not elaborate on the details of the planned measures, they will be reflected in the economic policy for the second half of this year. Lawmakers will vote on the confirmation of Prime Minister nominee Hwang Kyo-won tomorrow morning. With the vote, the start of the Assembly's 4-day interpellation session has been delayed a day to Friday. Our Park Ji-won tells us more.
After a tug-of-war between the rival parties that has continued since Prime Minister nominee Hwang Kyo-won's 3-day confirmation hearing ended last week, the rival camps finally agreed to vote on the nomination on Thursday morning. The decision came after last-minute negotiations between the deputy floor leaders of the two parties Wednesday morning, where the ruling Saenuri Party agreed to accept the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy's demand to set up a special committee on improving the hearing process in exchange for holding the vote on the nominee. The ruling Saenuri Party was aiming to call the vote as soon as possible.
The confirmation of the Prime Minister nominee is an urgent matter that cannot be delayed any further to minimize the vacuum in state affairs.
The Prime Minister nominee has faced harsh criticism from opposition lawmakers who said he's unfit for the post. They said he's not qualified as he wasn't willing to be thoroughly scrutinized over a string of allegations against him, such as his exemption from his mandatory military service and accusations of influence peddling because he didn't turn in all of the related documents. They only agreed to go ahead with the vote after the ruling party agreed to set up the special committee on the hearings.
The special committee is aimed at resolving the long-standing problems with the confirmation hearing process that were revealed at Hwang's hearing, such as a sloppy examination of his credentials and institutional loopholes.
The new prime minister, if confirmed on Thursday, will answer lawmakers' questions on state affairs at the 4-day interpellation session that starts Friday. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
Korea's top diplomat will visit Tokyo next week as Korea and Japan remain tangled in a dispute over history. It will be Foreign Minister Yoon Byung-se's first trip to Japan since taking office in 2013. But will it be enough to spark fresh momentum in their relations? Our Hwang Sung-hee has this report.
Korean Foreign Minister Yoon Byung-se will make a two-day trip to Tokyo as the two neighbors struggle for a breakthrough in their frosty ties.
Foreign Minister Yoon Byung-se will visit Japan from the 21st to the 22nd of June to attend a reception marking the 50th anniversary of Korea and Japan's normalization of relations, which is being held in Tokyo on Monday. He will also hold talks with the Japanese Foreign Minister Fumio Kishida.
It'll be Yoon's first visit to Tokyo since taking office in 2013. He canceled a planned trip at the last minute that year, following a controversial visit to the Yasukuni War Shrine by Japanese Deputy Prime Minister Taro Aso. An official at Korea's foreign ministry said Yoon's visit is significant, as it comes amid efforts by Seoul and Tokyo to improve ties in the 50th year of the normalization of their diplomatic relations. On Monday, the Japanese embassy in Seoul will also hold a ceremony to mark the anniversary. Although the leaders of the two countries will not be present for the events, they are each expected to send messages. Still, there is little hope that Yoon's visit will spark a dramatic improvement in their relations. Korea and Japan are mired in a dispute over history centered on Tokyo's wartime sexual enslavement of Korean women. The official at Seoul's foreign ministry said that while the two ministers will discuss a range of issues on Sunday, he does not expect any groundbreaking agreement on the so-called comfort women issue. Hwang Sang-hee, Arirang News.
U.S. President Barack Obama has sent a civil nuclear energy cooperation agreement with Korea to U.S. Congress for approval. If it passes, and it should, South Korea will be allowed to begin research into recycling spent nuclear fuel as well as producing low-grade uranium, providing it as Washington's permission, that is. For more on this report, we turn to our Kim Hyun-bin.
A day after Korea and the U.S. signed the Civil Nuclear Energy Cooperation Agreement, U.S. President Barack Obama sent the agreement to Congress for approval on Tuesday, saying that the Asian ally has a strong track record on non-proliferation. The agreement is a revision to their 1974 Nuclear Cooperation Pact, which lays out Korea's responsibilities in exchange for technical support and cooperation from Washington. The agreement was made after more than 4 years of negotiations that focused on reconciling Seoul's demand for the right to reprocess spent nuclear fuel and enriched uranium with Washington's concerns about proliferation. The new deal still bans Korea from reprocessing and enrichment, but allows the country to begin research into a technology for recycling spent nuclear fuel, known as pyroprocessing, and developing low-grade enriched uranium with the U.S.'s consent. Obama wrote in a letter to Congress that the agreement meets all the criteria for non-proliferation established in Section 123 of the U.S. Atomic Energy Act, and provides a comprehensive framework for peaceful nuclear cooperation with the ROK based on a mutual commitment to non-proliferation. Obama emphasized that Korea has a strong track record on non-proliferation and that it constantly reiterated its commitment to non-proliferation. Congress has 90 congressional days to review the agreement, which could extend to 6 months. The pact will pass if there is no opposition during that time, and experts believe it will. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
And in Washington, South Korean Foreign Minister held talks on Tuesday with U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Tony Blinken. According to our Han Da-eun, the two diplomats discussed a wide range of issues with North Korea topping their agenda. Take a look.
South Korea and the United States have agreed to ramp up the pressure on North Korea in an effort to get North Korea to denuclearize. The vow came after South Korean Foreign Minister Yoon Byung-se and U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Tony Blinken met for talks on Tuesday in Washington. Blinken is filling in for Secretary of State John Kerry, who is recovering from a leg injury after a cycling accident. Referring to the six-party denuclearization talks, Seoul's foreign ministry said South Korea and the U.S. will respond strongly to any North Korean provocations or threats, while strengthening cooperation with the other members of the talks for resuming meaningful dialogue. The multilateral dialogue involving the two Koreas, the U.S., China, Japan, and Russia, has been stalled for more than 6 years. Regarding President Park Geun-hye's visit to Washington, the two sides agreed to work together to reschedule her trip to the earliest possible date. The South Korean leader postponed her trip last week to cope with the outbreak of Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, or MERS, at home. The South Korean minister also briefed Blinken on the efforts Korea is making to improve ties with Japan ahead of the 50th anniversary of the normalization of their relations next week. 한단, Arirang News.
North Korea has repatriated 2 South Koreans who were detained in the north for about a month. The 2, known to be a couple in their 50s, were returned through the truce village of Panmunjom this morning. The north said it was sending them back as a humanitarian gesture. The South Korean government is checking their health and investigating why they crossed the China-North Korea border back in May. Pyongyang is still holding 4 other South Koreans captive. They include Kim Jong-wook, a missionary who was arrested by the regime in 2013, and Chu Won-moon, who voluntarily and illegally entered North Korea 2 months ago. Seoul tried to send a letter to Pyongyang last Friday urging the regime to release the 4 detainees immediately, but the North Koreans refused to accept it. And South Korea will return a North Korean ship that was found drifting in the East Sea. Seoul's Unification Ministry said Wednesday that it has decided to repatriate the vessel's 5 crewmen on Thursday, according to their wishes. The North Korean ship was found by the South Korean Coast Guard on Tuesday. The ship was drifting after an engine malfunction. It's the second time this year the South Korean government has returned a boat and its crew following the rescue of 2 North Koreans back in February, also found in the East Sea. That's it from us. More at 10 p.m. Korea time. We'll see you then.